Hey, Composer Gloves here. This is another video on how to make a track in FL Studios for the first time. Today we're going to cover the mixing. We're going to cover the mixer. And now what a mixer is it's sort of a concept, and it's important to get your head around the concept of a mixer. It impacted my compositional abilities a ton. It's like this. It's the subject of study for several schools. You can get degrees in mixing and things. So what is it? Well, you have a track or a piece of audio or something, and you give it its own sonic character and space, mostly through the mixer. You send audio in and you route it through effects and various methods. And there's all these philosophies sort of around how to deal with audio, and you get your song. It's what separates. So there's something called mixing, and then there's something called mastering, which is sort of like an extreme mix down, except for you're dealing with only one, the song itself, the whole song. In mixing, you're dealing with each element of the song. So each kick I have in my project here, each one of these kicks, each synthesizer is going to its own mixer track, as you can see right here, and is being treated a little bit differently to give it space in the mix. Now, there's a lot of opinions here. As I said, it's sort of a philosophical debate, and there are some people who make their living doing this, so they take it very seriously. Other people say it's just art and just do what you think sounds good. If you consider some of the professionals out there, and there's some interesting videos of people who are professional. I'm not going to just throw out names, but you could probably, in the comments, if you have one you feel strongly about, that do not know what they're doing. They just sort of do what they think sounds good. They might do something that's completely the opposite of what general practice would say. And general practice might say that because in mixing, generally you do a lot of moves because you're getting ready for the master and you're going to really pump it up. Versus someone else might just boost the crap out of it and not really do much during the master. You know, there's just all these different ways of going about it. And so just keep that in mind as we're going through this. And when you hear opinions, it's just something you need to be aware of when people talk about mixing and, oh, you're clipping here, you're doing that. Now, clipping is generally bad, and I'll demonstrate that in a little bit. So right now I have my pattern clips in all my channels, and they're being routed in. And I've got, you can see which channel they're going in. You can see this one's going into mixer track 1. So if we go to mixer track 1, here it is. And if I were to play that kick, you see it represented here. Now this is called the dB meter, and I've set my mixer to show this just because it's more useful. And you'll notice that as I move my selection by this green arrow around, the dB meter over here does not show anything. But as soon as I move it to the 1, it shows something. So that's important to know that this, it's called decibel meter, is showing the one you have selected. It's not related to the master at all. Another quick note, as you saw that just disappeared, these are the docks. And you click them, these gray line right here, to get rid of them and to show them. And these docks are basically always there. So you have all these tracks, and you can move around, and you can move through your tracks, but you can also set tracks to appear in your docks by just right-clicking and dock to left, middle, right. Pretty simple. So that's a feature that can be pretty handy. I like to put my mic over here. That way I can just click over here and change anything I need over there. And we're going to cover just some general practices with using a mixer because it's a great sound design tool as well. So we have our kick coming through, and this going down the line, we have a mute button. Now the mute, as you can see, the audio still gets down to the bottom of the channel. So it still goes through all our effects, which we'll talk about, but it does not go to the places we have routed it down here. So once it comes down here, we can send it to another track, or we could send it to the master. And the way you do that is you right click, route to this track, or you can route to this track only, which will remove all previous routing and route it to just one track. Or you can side chain it to a track. This is where it sends the input of the signal, but not the audio itself. So it's sending something saying there's audio at this moment, but it's not sending the audio itself. That's what side chaining is. And that's used for various types of plugins to achieve sort of a pumping effect, or just a way to get certain things out of the way so that other stuff can come through more clearly. It's sort of like volume automation controlled by a volume input. So when the kick happens, everything that's not the kick being routed through this plugin is going to be silenced or quieted or something. So don't worry about that if you don't understand what that means. Just know that you can route things through this arrow down here. So I could route to this track, and boom, now it's going out here. I could just click the arrow to do it, and I click them again to unroute them. And you see it's represented by this little tie thing. Something new in FL Studios 12. It's kind of cool. So once we have our audio coming in here, and we can mute it or unmute it as we talked about. This is the fader. I mean, not the fader. This is the pan knob. So out the left, out the right, in the middle. So in the middle is called mono. It's important to note in FL Studios 2 that everything is already stereo. It's all stereo tracks, meaning it has both a left and a right, which could become important later because some things should be mono, but we're not going to talk about that right now. So you have your fader, which is essentially your volume. Now this is important. This is where you kind of want to do your mixing. So if you want everything being sent into this track to be generally quiet, you can make that quiet. You generally want to automate. If you're going to automate volume, you want to automate the channel volume. If you're going to automate a fader, you're probably going to want to route your thing through a track into the track that you're going to fade or automate, I mean, if that makes sense. When you get into composition and you want to do things, it's just important that you understand how the routing works and how you set it up. Because if you don't, you're going to have problems doing things that you want to do. You'll eventually come across it. Amongst the other important knobs, we're just going to leave the rest of them for now. Those are the ones that you should really touch. As well as, let's talk about over here now. So your audio is going in, and it's going through something called an EQ. An EQ is a plugin that is basically a volume specific into your spectrum. So you can boost the low, mid, or high. Now this is called the EQ2, and it's loaded up in this channel strip because this is the one I have selected. It's got the green box around it. And you can load up more by going in here, and these are all your effect plugins. And so if we double click and we'll open up here, we have this plugin. As you see, we can see the spectrum content of our sound as it plays. And this is the low end, and I have boosted that low end specifically. I could take down the high end and roll it over, and it kills parts of the high end. So it's useful for taking out specific areas of a sound. So you can create holes in your mix to make room for other things. Things that, like, for example, if I have a kick that's taking up a lot of high end, well, that's going to take away from my hi-hats and all these different things. So I could remove some of that high end on my kick by doing this. And now I'll have some more room to put other elements. It'll come through more clearly. At least that is the idea. Again, this is mostly opinion. So that's what an EQ does in a nutshell. We're going to cover a whole slew of typical plugins in a plugin video all on its own. But you can load up a whole bunch of them and achieve what's called a chain. And what the chain does is you are just sending it through those effects, and they are relative to where they land in the chain. So if our EQ comes first and then another EQ, it'll behave differently than if we switch the orders. You can switch the order by just scrolling while you're on top of it. So I put my mouse over it and start scrolling, and I move the order around. I'm not moving my mouse, actually. I'm just scrolling the scroll wheel. So that's that. Now, if you have a USB audio interface set up through your audio tab, you can set up which mic you want to come through, and you could select your mic. I'm talking through mic 1, and you'll see that mic 1 is the one selected, and it's going through all these various effects, but I've muted the channel. So it gets to Edison, which is a plugin that allows me to record my voice, but it gets stopped. It does not come out to master, so I am not distracted by the sound of my own voice while I make these. This is a limiter. This just makes sure that if I decide to scream or make some loud noise, it does not distort. We'll talk about limiters later. I'm just going to cover basic functions of these things again. So now you understand you have audio coming in, you have effects that are affecting your sound in various ways. And another nifty thing is you can turn these effects on and off via this. So if we turned our EQ off and I hit the kick, it's sort of a subtle change. You can hear the click of it turning on and off though. That's kind of funny. But if we come over, let's go to something a bit more dynamic. Let's see what's in 5. What do I have in 5? All right, so we have an EQ, and let's make a crazy change to this EQ. And as you can see, I just boosted that in. Well, I can mute that so I can hear what it sounds like without it. And you can also change the amount right here, and you can automate these things. And so you could change the amount that this has. So you can turn this off for one part of your song and then turn it back on for another part of your song. So you can create some interesting movement effects. Now, Control Z will not undo movements like that. So you got to be careful when you're moving stuff like this around. If you move something over here and you hit Control Z, it's not going to undo that. So just so you know. So our EQ is reflected down here along with various other controls. Don't worry too much about it. I recommend not touching this EQ. Just use the EQ for the parametric EQ and you'll be just fine. And again, we'll cover this in the plugins. This bottom one selects which speakers come out. Now you'll notice your master, which is this guy right here. Everything is being routed to your master by default. And then you can change that. For example, I have some things going to only sidechain. They only go to sidechain so that because sidechain does something specific. So it goes into sidechain, or in this particular case, it goes into the Harmor, which I think is a mistake. But anyways, I bet it was supposed to go to sidechain. And sidechain then goes out to the master. So it's everything, well, most things get sent through here and then come out to the master. And this is where I set my speakers, and that's why it's like that. So, and by default, it's like that. All your channels are set like that because that's just good default position. Where else would you want the audio to go, you know? Again, if your things are not set like this right here, this is being sent to the master immediately. The master doesn't have a number, so it's just, I guess the number would be 0. So if that represented 0. Right now it's just a bunch of lines. That's pretty much it. You can rename tracks and recolor them right here. You can solo things by Whoop. Sorry about that. That kind of scared me. You can solo things by right-clicking and unsolo everything by right-clicking again. And yeah, I heard my own voice. I was kind of like, whoa, where did that voice come from? It's because this channel got unmuted. You can scroll up and down and it will change your fader. Most of it's inner knowledge of plugins, how to use them, and just understanding the concept of routing your audio to achieve what's called submixes. So this sidechain is considered a submix. Things are going through effects here before they go out to the master. So it is submixing things. And there's all sorts, you can get literally, this is where a lot of creativity happens. Great options. So once you understand the concept of the mixer, you're on your way to making a song that sounds well mixed. It'll start to sound more mature because your songs will have their own sonic characteristics. And you'll start to develop your own practices. Some of them may be consistent with, you know, standard best practices. Some of them may not. And it probably will vary considering the genre you're making. So, yeah, just keep that in mind as you're composing. If you have any questions about this, drop them in the comments. If you have best practices, or maybe you're passionate about a particular rule in mixing, maybe it's something I'm breaking here. I tend to throw some rules out the window every now and then. Subscribe, share this video with someone you think would value it, and have a blessed day.